Okay, how's everybody doing? Good.
Sorry,
How
I'm
was-
just lazy. Wait, that was not for the group.
Oh, okay. How was your break?
Really great.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I forgot.
That's okay.
Saan basa, what does that mean?
It means one fall, right?
One rise,
One fall.
Okay, I know something wrong with one, so I didn't know exactly. Thank you, everybody.
What did you do during your break?
Is it too dark?
What did you do on the break?
Phone calls,
Went on a-
workout, beer. Did anybody went to the water?
Yeah,
To the lake? How was it?
there's a giant boulder down there, it's like this big.
A mole? Well, team, let's have our last conversation on the next. How about that? And then we can close today. And also, we want to talk to you today, which Kate will lead this piece on, but just around, how many of you feel that you want to continue with this kind of reorientation or thinking, that you want to deepening into that? Raise your hand up, some of you. Not everybody, but okay, good, some. We want to figure out how to be supported of that. And we know that tomorrow most of us are leaving by 2:45. So we actually want to figure out what that would look like. Because it's kind of hard to do follow-up on the phone. Is that true or not?
Yeah.
Especially with all of us that, with our crazy schedules and our crazy lives. But we'll talk about that at the end. But I want to talk about mass training. Can you say mass training with me?
Mass training.
Perfect. So I want to tell you my training stories. I have a training story of self. I'm sorry, I gotta tell you my training story of self because, okay, let me see how it starts. Well, that's okay, that's fine. We already talked about that. Okay. It all starts with Vistaprint for me. Did anybody here have the Vistaprint business cards? Right? Remember the Vistaprint business cards that you get the whole with the ads in the back because you were so broke you couldn't afford a real business card? So when I was probably around my 20, and when I was 20 or something, I was doing my quote unquote, my one-on-one meetings with my leaders. And you know, I had at that time a Vistaprint card, and I was meeting one-on-one, and somebody said, hey, well, okay, let's talk more. So I pull out my Vistaprint business card, and I give it to him, and he says to me, he reads at the card, and he says, you're youth organizing, right? Because it said youth organizing, and I was like, yeah, I'm a youth organizer. And he said to me, well, so what does organizing really mean? And I was like, well, you know, we do protests, meetings, stuff like that. We get the community together, fight for rights. And then he asked me deeper, you know, he's like, so where do you learn this? You know, I was like, no, you don't learn it, you just do it. You just do it. It comes out, you just do it. And then he said to me, well, but like, is there like a manual or like something you read to inform your thinking about what you're doing? I was like, no, there's no manuals. I haven't seen one at least, you know. And that's how the conversation ended. And then it took me a while, but he just kind of put this question in my mind about like, there's gotta be a manual. And at that time, we used to read a lot about Martin Luther King and stuff, but it was more inspirational than strategic. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because I just get inspired, but I really was able to read through the lines, you know? And I then went to the library, because at that time there wasn't that much Google yet as it is now. And I went to a library and I asked for books about organizing. And after maybe reading through 20 books or checking through 20 books about how to organize your closet or your room or all the other books that are related to this topic, I found Rules for Radicals by Soloninsky. And I found Rules for Radicals, and for me, that revelation was amazing. Because I was like, oh my God, everything that I've been wanting to do at that time, right, it's here. Like he's talking about confronting power. In some ways it was systematized, right? It had principles and rules. I mean, it had rules. At that point I had no rules, you know, I was like, I don't know how to do it. And that led me into a trajectory of going through the IF, Industrial Areas Foundation's training program, working with them, but then really becoming obsessed about organizing, going to every training I could, and going to Midwest, going to this, going to that, really absorbing all the training I could do. Then, as I was part of the IIF, I wanted to do immigration work, and they told me that they wouldn't do any movements, because movements, or the momentum tradition, is fucked up. Makes no sense. You know, and one organizer told me that
Where are you going?
are you trying to get some
I thought you had to be moving for that to work.
but that's cool. And they told me literally, look, Carlos, if you want to do immigrant rights, you need to build a movement. And I was like, but we don't build movements. We think movements are bad. I'm like, so it's like, okay, you want me to build a movement, but you're saying movements are bad. I was like, okay, well, this is kind of confusing. I'm confused. Thank you. And that led me to go to meet this guy, Marshall Gantz, right there. And Marshall was a crazy guy. Because first of all, I don't know, I am from Boston. And to think that you're gonna learn organizing at Harvard, thank you so much, that we're gonna learn, oh, it was
All the
blue?
Boston people in the house.
Yeah, we love Boston.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We'll keep it up, don't worry. There's some New Yorkers here, we only try to
Yeah.
feel safe. We don't wanna put our pride too much. Okay, but to me, being from Boston and thinking that I was gonna learn organizing at Harvard sounded like an oxymoron. You know, it's like Harvard, and I was like, who the heck he think he is, and it's Harvard, and I had all these conceptions around it. But what I noticed with Marshall was that he really focused a lot in training trainers and training coaches and coaches training trainers. And he said to me one time, because I went to his class, it's a 5 month, 6 months class, and he said to me, why don't you train the material I'm giving you? Why don't you give it to other people? I was like, oh yeah, that's fine, I don't know. He's like, he told me the measurement of an organizer is how much information you can train others or educate others on. Right? He's like, he pretty much said, it's not your job really to mobilize people, it's to train people that will mobilize others. So then you have to become kind of an educator of organizing. And I was like, that was kind of a brilliant thought for me. So I really learned the culture of training through Marshall. In IAF, there is a culture of training, but not of mass training. There's more of a culture of apprenticeship and coaching. Mass training for them is 10-day training once a year, and it's very selective. You only get there if you have a relationship with somebody. So if you want to have leadership development, you actually have to jump a lot of hoops to get there, right? So I began my process of training, and it started with my organization called the Student Immigrant Movement. This is from one of our rallies in 2006. That's Constanza there, being Lady Liberty, of course in shackles, we're always trying to demonstrate oppression. And I would say to people, look, now we're going to do 3-day training. And I would literally get up and tell people and talk for 30 hours. And I confused the crap out of people. They will just look at me like this. And I'll be struggling. Who's been in a situation like that? Where you're in a training, you're trying to train somebody, and you're just like, this is not working. You know? And thank you, Sam, a second. Right here, me, please. Look me, affirm me, I'm doing okay. And I went through this process, and if you go and ask some of the folks at the Student Immigrant Movement back in those years in 2007 and 8, they will tell you, oh my God, training was great, but my God, Carlos was so boring. And why is he talking for 3 days on a row? You know, and then I got mad intense. I was like, we're gonna do trainings every 3 months. And then it was like, we're gonna do trainings every month. We're gonna do trainings every other week. You know, it's like more training. But what I noticed is that training is a muscle. It's a muscle that an individual can develop, it's a muscle that an organization can develop, it's a muscle that a culture can develop. And really at the beginning it's trial and error. You know? And I talked to some of you and it's like, oh my God, it's engaging, we do the clapping, we do the steps, all these little tricks, right, around training. Those are learned through the process of developing a culture of training. You know? And to be honest with you, nobody really taught me how to train. Nobody really told me, Carlos, this is the 10 process for training. Nobody really did. And I actually feel I would have bored less people if somebody would have. Because in my organization, in my movement, there was no culture of mass training. So it's like you're trying to go at it by yourself. Which in United We Dream now is a little different. So let me show you that. So we did that, and then we got to United We Dream. And that's from one of our trainings. Carolina was part of that. That's in Colorado, and we trained about 200 people, I think, that weekend. And in United We Dream, we began a process, and we trained in about 3 to 4 years, about 4,000 people. And there, we develop a process where people can become trainers, and people can coach other people. and really was part of our culture. Is it a perfect culture? By no means, no. Of course, we need to improve dramatically, but the culture of training was very important in developing the network. So, and led to this, right? Led for us from being 7 groups, as I shared with you, in early 2009, to be like this late 2010. Massive, massive growth just by putting people into training. So can somebody read this line, please? Yes, sir?
The Grange, for example, a rural organization key to the agrarian movement of the late 19th century, enjoyed a membership of 4,500 organized and 450 chapters, a structure that required recruiting men and women for 775 voluntary leadership posts, of which 77, 248 or 99.3% were local, 510 at the state level, and only 17 at the national level. 1 of every 5 members occupied a formal leadership post at any one time.
I think it's important to understand scale, we need to understand training. I think to me that's the greatest lesson. To really understand scale, we need to understand training. And the capacity to get more scale is the capacity that you have for more training. Now, if you have a big action, a big moment of the world when you can hit one out of the park, you can get hundreds of people. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to essentially do what you want them to do. It's a different kind of capacity. But I just want you to think about this. 17th national level. 17 staff. Is that a lot of people, yes or no?
Over 500,000 people.
Or 500,000 people? How many people are in your staff, Curtis?
8.
8. So, Curtis, can we assume that you can get to 200,000? Why not? If we've developed the right mechanisms, it surely can. It depends what those 8 do. Is that correct or not?
Yeah.
So let's keep going. Let's talk about growth. So training. Can you say training with me?
Training.
Can you say training one more time?
Training.
Can you say just one more time? Training. Say just one more time. Training. I know. I just heard you. I'm so sorry. I needed to come to training to hear about training. But what is the 3 reasons why we do training? The first reason is we gotta really absorb momentum. That's the first main reason. So if you are thinking of doing momentum, you have to do training. I hope that's already very clarified. Number 2, we gotta get the movement on the same page, or the organization. Training is the best way to get anything, any movement organization. If you look at many corporations, and actually there's, I don't know, has anybody read Training Magazine? Training Magazine? Okay, maybe I'm a little nerd here. There's actually a magazine called Training Magazine. I am so sorry, I'm putting my nerdum over there. So there's a magazine called Training Magazine that analyzes all the training programs or corporations or major nonprofits. It looks at all their training programs and says which corporation, because most of them are corporations, have the best training programs. And what some of the research that the magazine and other experts on training are discovering is that the organizations that have more alignment are the ones that have better training programs. That the ones that have a culture of apprenticeship, a culture of training, or getting massive training within their institutions are the ones that can get people on the same page. So actually they have a yearly conference. It's been one of my organizing dreams to one day go and learn from all the other training masters. And this is the other thing why training is a must. Because it creates massive amount of leaders and teams in a short time. And yeah, I don't know, should I say more about that? It's just awesome, right? Can we just say it's awesome? It's just awesome. Yeah, I'm not gonna sell more of these. Okay, we got exponential growth. We already talked about this. I'll go back to this. Okay. So let me ask you a quick question, because I think this is important. We talk about scale, we talk about growth, but I think it's important for us to figure out how much growth do we really want to have? What is the growth that you're trying to work around? Now some of you might say, well, I need 1 million people. That's fine. If that's the growth, then we can start breaking that number down and get into how many people we need to train. But let me ask you a question. For a second, talk to the person to the left and the right and ask them, how much people do you want in your organization? How many? Go, talk to somebody. Talk to somebody.
Think back from, you need active support from 3.5%. We're talking about the US, and we need, yeah, 12 to 13 billion. So the question is, how many people do you need in your organization to get that many actively supported? So applying like a 10 to 1 ratio, then you need 1.2 million people. I think that's the number.
So how many people do you need to train
So if you have teams of 10, which seems reasonable, then you need 100,000. Then you need 100,000 teams. Doable? Rev math. Yeah. It's like